We're going to talk about, as we have been for, well, 3 or 4 days now, talking about solutions. And this one particular project of how do we get to 100% renewables. Please join me in welcoming from Stanford University, Mark Jacobson, and from Pegasus Capital, Marco Krapels. So you are 2/3 of the solutions project, Mark and Marco, and then there's another guy whose name I think is Mark Ruffalo. But let's, before we get into all of that.
Once, right?
Right, that's right, that's right. So let's get into this. It's starting off with you, Mark, just to give us the high level. What is a solutions project?
Well, the Solutions Project is a group that combines science and business and culture, and we try to develop science-based plans to change the energy infrastructure of individual states and countries to 100% renewable energy for all purposes. That's electricity, transportation, heating and cooling, and industry. And to take these science-based plans and then engage businesses and policymakers and educate the public about them, and with the goal of trying to actually get to 100% renewable energy around the world as fast as we can. And specifically, really the goal is to get to 80 to 85% conversion to complete renewable energy in all sectors by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And this means by 2020, making all new transportation electric or some hydrogen, heating and cooling electrified, and industry electrified as well. So it's really converting everything, and it's engaging businesses and policymakers and the public and trying to get to actually implement these changes.
So business, science, and culture coming together to do this bold and sort of audacious goal. I mean, we've heard a number of those kinds of goals over the year, kinds of projects. We get 100% renewables, 100 or carbon neutral world, and lots of different things. How is this different?
Well, this differs because we actually have a plan. We've actually done a lot of the detailed statistics for this in terms of energy resources. The plan involves everything being derived from wind, water, and solar power. That's onshore and offshore wind turbines, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, solar hot water heaters, some geothermal, existing hydroelectric. We would not increase hydroelectric, but use existing, and a tiny amount of tidal and wave power. So we've mapped most of this, 90% plus will be wind and solar, which you can power the entire world with solar many times over, 30 times over, for all purposes. And with wind, you can power the entire world 5 to 6 times over for all purposes. So we map that. We do the details of, is there enough land area? How much land would it take up? How many jobs would be created? What would the cost be? And we've actually done state-by-state plans for the US where we analyze, is it possible in each state? So the difference is that while other goals have been theoretical, we've actually tried to map out and develop plans that policymakers can then take to implement.
Great. Well, let's get into some of the business, and then we'll talk later about the cultural piece of this. But you're a Wall Street guy. You've run the numbers on this. What's the financing piece? How do we do this?
Well, it needs to make economic sense, right? I mean, to have a plan as credible as Professor Jacobson's needs to make economic sense. So the question really is transitioning to an economy that's powered by renewables, does that make economic sense? And is that in our best economic interest? Now, for those of you that are sitting in this room that are residents of California, and probably residents of any other US state, you've seen your retail utility rates rise the tune of 3 to 5-fold over the last 30 to 40 years. Right? And that's after $600 billion of tax-paying money subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, which, if you ask me, is a horrible return on our taxpayer money, right? And so we have actually invested a little bit of our taxpayer money, only a fraction of what the fossil fuel industry has received, into getting wind and solar up and running in the last 5 years. The cost of those technologies has respectively dropped somewhere between 60 and 80%, which if you approach it from return on taxpayer money, that's a great investment, right? That's a great IRR for the taxpayer. And also it achieves price stability. the 10 US states with the highest penetration of wind, as Professor Jacobson has demonstrated, actually saw their retail electricity rates flatten or even decrease in the last 5 years, whereas the other states that have a lower penetration of renewables saw a continuous rise in retail electricity rates. So, it needs to make economic sense. There are companies like Walmart that understand that. I mean, why Walmart, you can say what you want to say about Walmart, but they're putting more solar on their roofs than many states individually have done collectively in the entire history of those states. Why is Walmart doing it? They're achieving price stability. The only way to hedge your 20-year cost of electricity is by locking in renewables through wind or solar. It's an effective hedge against rising utility rates. And you can see that trend. It's happening. It competes in probably 12 states today. It will compete in 22 states in 18 months. We're passing an inflection point, and I think a lot of the demand in this country, and probably abroad as well, is going to be driven by economic demand, not just policy demand. But we need policy leadership as well, and I think that's utterly lacking on both a federal and state level right now in this country.
So what's going to drive this? Is this, let's stipulate that the technology is kind of there. It'll continue to get better. So this is not a technology problem. This is true with so many of the Verge topics that we discuss. Is it a policy issue, a finance and capital availability issue?
Well, in my opinion, it's not, as you say, it's not a technical or even an economic issue. It's more of a social and political issue. First, most people don't know that this is possible. And so they don't know that you can actually power the whole world with clean renewable energy for all purposes. And there are many roadblocks in the sense that there's vested interests in the current energy infrastructure that don't want to change, because there is plenty of energy around, relatively inexpensive energy, although it's getting more and more expensive over time. There's plenty of energy, fossil fuel energy, for the next few hundred years, depending on how you calculate it. So you only would change if you really want to solve these climate and air pollution problems, but also if you're concerned about instability of prices, because as Marco said, you go to wind and solar, there's zero fuel cost. So once you install the technologies, you have stable prices. Right. So you stabilize the price of energy by going to wind and solar. And you also would create jobs by doing this. So that's a good question. Why wouldn't we transition faster? It's because there is such an ingrained infrastructure that the people who have the vested interest, they're making a lot of money on their current infrastructure, and they don't want to change. So they will fight tooth and nail to prevent a change. Now, there is a change going on, but it's slower than we need to really address those serious problems that we face in society.
So we have the natural gas boom going on thanks to fracking, and doesn't that change the game in the sense that we have cheap energy now, and we're on our way to energy independence, which, as we heard yesterday from Colonel Mark Puck Mickleby, is maybe sort of a joke, or a wrong strategy. But regardless, we have now a lot of cheap energy that's making the economics, I think, of renewables less favorable. How does that factor in, Marco?
So it's a good question on the natural gas side. I mean, if you look at the structure of your utility bill, if you're particularly a residential homeowner or you're a business owner, a lot of that is transmission and distribution. It's not just generation, right? So natural gas, people say, oh, great, we're going to frack the entire country, we're going to pollute our water, we're going to make sure that that's exempt from the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, and that's going to be the best thing since sliced bread. Well, it actually is not. Again, from a cost perspective, yes, on the industrial side, folks increasingly are able to power their factories with cheaper natural gas. On the residential side and on the commercial side, once you factor in the cost of transmission and distribution, those retail costs will continue to rise. We had cheap coal, right? Well, what happened? Our cost of power went from 3 cents per kilowatt hour to about 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now we have cheap gas, and I think it was PG&E that just put through a 5.8% rate increase here, and we have all this cheap natural gas. So it's not reflected in someone's utility bill, and I think the American consumer is going to wake up and say, well, wait a minute, I am not benefiting from this. And so and those consumers are going solar increasingly. Companies here in the Bay Area like Solar City, they're going to sign up 1 million new customers in the next 4 years. And those customers become voters, right? Once you own the solution, you're going to vote to support that solution. So I think really we are going to get to an inflection point where people understand that being energy independent doesn't mean that 5 companies get the profit from finding one more way to extract the last drop of hydrocarbons. Being energy independent is being able to make your own power, store your own power, and eventually sell it to whoever you want. And it's the new sharing economy. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen, and it's coming from the Bay Area for sure.
So I want to get down to the plan, because I think you're in some ways preaching to the choir here. We all get the value of renewables. There's a whole bunch of other sessions talking about how we get to renewables. But what's the plan to get to 100%? I mean, what needs to happen? Is how much of it is a policy change, and if so, at what level? Federal, state, local? Which one of you wants to dive into that?
Well, I'll address that. So really, most of it has to be addressed at the policy level. And in the United States, the federal government is fairly paralyzed. So we really think at the state level, that's where you're going to get the best benefit. And so we're trying to educate people in, especially states where there's more likely to be a change. But surprisingly, some of the states that have advanced the most are the ones, for example, the 2 states in the United States that have the highest fraction of their electricity from wind are now Iowa and South Dakota. They have almost 30% of their electricity from wind because it's so cheap. It's 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour unsubsidized in the Great Plains. In fact, it's the cheapest form of electric power in the US now. It's half the price of natural gas, which is about 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour unsubsidized, and which is about the same as utility scale solar now. But you have to address at the policy level. Individuals can do things in their own home, of course, like retrofitting their homes or weatherizing them, more energy efficient appliances, electric cars, solar on their rooftops. But really, the major changes have to be at the policy level, because we need large implementation of onshore and offshore wind and utility scale solar in addition, because even if we power the entire US with wind, water, or solar, rooftop solar, for example, would only be less than 9% of the total power demand, even if we covered virtually all rooftops that are south-facing in the United States. So you're not going to power the whole US with just rooftop solar. So you need utility scale solar and rooftop and onshore and offshore wind. But the only way to get these implemented are to have policies that really drive the price down, or make the fossil fuels pay their correct price to pay for the 63,000 deaths per year in the US due to fossil fuel air pollution, including 5,000 due to natural gas, which costs the taxpayers 3.3% of the GDP of the United States each year.
So we've got some of the world's biggest companies in the room and watching this online, and some of them are big energy buyers. They have data farms and lots of other energy-intensive processes in industrial transportation, up their supply chains. What do you want them to do? How do they fit into this? What's the ask?
Well, if I may just, and I'll get back to that question, and it ties into the answer to your last question. But the ask is this: let's take California as an example, right? The great renewable state. Well, most of the policies that are currently in place were put in place under a Republican governor, and at that time we looked at a 33% RPS. That's many, many years ago. We're going to achieve that in a few years. And if you ask me, in California, the question is, Governor Brown, what have you done for me lately? California is not leading right now. So how do you get California to lead again? Well, I think we need the Googles of this world, the Facebooks of this world that are sitting in this room, we need to inspire the governor to lead. We need a progressive RPS. That renewable portfolio standard at 33%, that's passed. We're there. We need to set a timetable and say, guys, can we get to 50% by 2030? Can we get to 80% by 2040? Let's map it out. Let's show some leadership and give the utilities enough time to decommission the assets that we know we're not going to need in the future. We know that we don't need natural gas peaking plants if we're going to go full forward on storage, on distributed storage, which also will provide for grid stability, right? So we need to give the utilities time to phase out the old assets, put progressive RPSs in place, and we need political leadership to be inspired and to back them to make a bold movement. And I think the companies in this room can certainly help achieve that.
So I think a lot of the companies are saying right now, well, yeah, okay, I get that, but the policy change, the getting the PUCs and the state legislatures to move this, even in, forget California, well, even in California, but anywhere, it's a long slog, and we don't, the time is moving on. But there's probably, I would think, and I think a lot of the progressive companies, the Googles and the Facebooks and the ones you named, would say that there's a market-based thing that we can do now without necessarily new policy that can actually move the needle. What do you want to see them do on the market front, Mark?
Well, the problem is we don't want to just move the needle. We need to accelerate by a factor of 10 to 100 the needle. And this cannot be done just by the current market. I mean, fossil fuels get subsidies. Like take natural gas and coal. You know, there's about 5 cents a kilowatt hour that they are not paying in health and climate costs. And this is on top of the subsidies, the direct subsidies that they get. So there's the subsidy that they don't pay for the pollution they cost, and there's the subsidy in the fact that they get direct subsidies, tax reductions, et cetera. So the first thing is to take away their direct subsidies, make them pay for their health and climate costs. Then their costs will definitely be much higher than all the renewable energies. Then you'll get this rapid acceleration.
So tell me, you want companies to start voluntarily, or how do they pay for their health costs of fossil fuel?
Well, no, this comes back to the policy level. The policymakers have to implement this to make the system such that the gas and coal and oil companies are paying their actual costs and not getting subsidies on top of that. That change in subsidy will allow this rapid transition.
So we need a new pricing structure.
Guys,
here.
we need a carbon tax.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, really. I mean, you can, there's all the infrastructure in place, and people say, yay, you know, the old coal plants can produce power at 4 cents. But if you factor into the cost of externalities, the healthcare cost, the 66,000 premature deaths in this country from air pollution that we are all paying for, those healthcare costs, we're paying for it. They're in our tax bill. And you know, that is completely irresponsible, right? So there needs to be a cost of polluting and killing people. And when you are factoring into that cost, and that should be a gradually phased in carbon tax, not too radical, but there needs to be a price on carbon. And when you create an economic impetus to move towards renewable, because the alternative is simply going to be more expensive. And you map out that roadway that, guys, every year we're going to increase the carbon tax. You keep polluting, you're going to end up paying more. Then naturally the demand for power is going to be clean. And so I do not think in this country we can sit here and have this discussion 10 years from now and not put a price on carbon. It's completely irresponsible.
I want to get to a question in a minute, but we talked about it's business, science, and culture. There's a cultural piece, and your third partner, Mark, the actor Mark Ruffalo, which wanted to be here. He'd hoped to be here, but his shooting schedule got in the way. So Marco, you're going to be the stand-in, and so to speak, at least from the perspective of what's the role of culture here?
Yes. Well, it's a very important role, right? Because I don't think the average American is really engaged with energy. Most people don't even know what they pay for their bill. They have no idea where their power comes from. And again, you know, if you got the Hulk in the Avengers, we've got Leonardo DiCaprio, Leo is very involved too. You've got guys that are cultural influencers that are engaging with a certain audience that the average policymaker and a great-looking scientist may not on a daily basis engage with, right? And so we have, I think, the combination of culture and to take this beyond your average NGO, and they're great NGOs, they've done amazing things, but I think we need to reach a segment of the population that's not engaged with this, and you know, who better than to have a guy that gets really angry and turns green if he doesn't get his way. So, you know, we have the benefit of having Mark Ruffalo as a co-founder and others as well, like Leo, and you know, just stay tuned. We've got some really great content coming out. We're going to be engaging with a much broader audience, and I think that will help move the needle, and hopefully that will inspire leaders like Governor Brown to step it up.
What's the last word you want to leave people with in terms of, first of all, is it thesolutionsproject.com or org, or the Solutions Project? I missed that.
Thesolutionsproject.org or 100.org, as in 100%, 100.org. Sign up, get involved, stay tuned. It's going to go big. We've got an army behind us, and we want you to get involved on a national scale and on the global scale. Professor Jacobson is working on 134 plants for 134 countries. There are 20 graduate students at Stanford right now typing away. So stay tuned, get involved. It's going to be big, and we need to do big things because we're running out of time.
Well, before the Army comes, we better get the hell off stage. So join me in thanking Mark and Marco.
Thanks so much.